We talk a lot as gardeners about how to do things in the garden that deter pests, specifically the insect pests that like to chew holes in our leaves, devour our fruit, and just generally lay waste to all of our hard efforts. We also talk about attracting beneficial insects to the garden, both pollinators and predators. What we don't talk about as often is how to identify which of those critters is beneficial and which is causing havoc. Sometimes they can look very similar to each other, and sometimes the ones that look the most menacing are actually the good guys. Ever seen a ladybug larvae? Yeah, those tiny little orange and black alligator, we want those in the garden. So today on Just Grow Something, we're talking insect identification. How do we know what insects in our garden are pests in our region? And how do we even start to identify these pests? By the end of the episode, you'll know what steps to take to find out what's good, what's bad, and how to tell the difference. Let's dig in.
Hey, I'm Karen, and what started as a small backyard garden 20 years ago turned into a lifelong passion for growing food. Now, as a market farmer and horticulturist, I want to help you do the same. On this podcast, I am your friend in the garden, teaching evidence-based techniques to help you grow your favorites and build confidence in your own garden space. So grab your garden journal and a cup of coffee and get ready to just grow something.
Before we jump in, this is your gentle reminder to add nutrients to your containers if you are growing in pots or small planters. Yes, we should be amending our containers in some way, and sometimes in the same way that we do our larger planters and our in-ground containers. But for the smaller stuff, we may not always feel the need to add compost or refresh the soil as often as we should. The smaller the volume of soil, the more quickly the soil nutrients are going to be depleted, especially if we have very demanding plants in that soil. So we need to be adding some food of some sort for that soil and for those plants. If you've got a lot of containers and you don't want to buy specific plant food for each one, depending on what it is that you're growing in each one, that's okay. Just get yourself a balanced amendment and follow directions for using that amendment on the package. I like a liquid version and I like to do it about once every 2 weeks or so, or maybe once per month, depending on what I'm growing. But a granulated version is fine too if you want to work that into the soil and then just let it slowly release into that soil over a period of 6 or 8 weeks. Just make sure that you are feeding those plants so they can continue to produce for you all season long or for as long as they are viable. Also, shout out to Rook, my newest patron over on Patreon. Rook has joined at the Buy Karen a Coffee level to support my caffeine habit while I'm over here cranking these episodes out to you. If you want to be like Rook and other patrons who are supporting this show in different ways, you can head to patreon.com/justgrowsomething or buymeacoffee.com/justgrowsomething for both monthly or one-time options to support the show. Both of those links are always in the show notes. Thank you, Rick, for your support. It really does mean a lot. This episode was inspired by a comment that I got from Manda on Spotify for the episode that we did on companion planting myths and tips. That was episode 246. She said, "Can you please do an episode on beneficial bugs versus the damaging one? I struggle to identify the good and the bad ones." That was a great suggestion. So here we are today. If you ever have a suggestion for an episode, feel free to comment on the episode in Spotify or on YouTube. You can also send me a DM on socials or just send me an email to grow@justgrowsomethingpodcast.com. I read every single comment and every single message and every single email, and I am happy to have suggestions for content after 4 years of doing this every single week. So thank you for the suggestion, Manda. On we go. So, understanding which insects are beneficial and which ones are harmful is really crucial for maintaining a healthy garden ecosystems. We obviously don't want the insects that are going to continue to predate on our things that we are trying to grow to be able to eat or even just for the beauty of them. And we also want to encourage the beneficials that are in there and without damaging them. So we don't want to just blanketly being, spraying insecticides or using things that might hurt the pollinators and also the other beneficials that, kind of do pest control for us. So, just to kind of define what it is that we're talking about, when I'm saying beneficial insects, I'm talking about those insects that play very vital roles like pollination or pest control, meaning they predate on other insects, and decomposition. So, for instance, ladybugs, specifically ladybug larvae, they consume large quantities of aphids. All right. Of course, we're also thinking about bees. Bees are our essential pollinators, and I'm not talking about honeybees necessarily. Those are imported here in North America. If you're someplace over in Europe, then yes, maybe, the honeybees are, doing a lot of the pollination there, but our native pollinators here as well are native bees, but also butterflies and moths and that sort of thing. Even things like pill bugs, they are very good for breaking down that detritus that is in our soil or on top of our soil. So those dead and decaying matter, and breaking that down so it works its way as fresh humus into our soil, right? These are all beneficial things that we want happening in our gardens. The pest insects are the ones that can damage what we are growing by feeding on the leaves or the stems or the roots or the fruits, or just by transmitting diseases through that feeding activity or even pollination activity. So, it may not be necessarily that their feeding is destroying the plant, but then in that point they transmit a disease, and that disease ends up damaging the plant. So aphids, for example, they suck the sap from the plants. They can also spread viruses, but in most instances, it's about, the damage that they do if they get to be overwhelming for a plant. A lot of plants can handle a little bit of aphid predation, but once it starts to get overwhelming, then they start to succumb. Cucumber beetles, they don't necessarily damage the plants as much as you might think. They damage the fruit. They can absolutely damage the actual cucumber itself. But as they're feeding on the plant, they are actually transmitting bacterial wilt, and that is what eventually ends up killing off your cucumber plant. Those pill bugs that I mentioned, yes, they are beneficial in the garden because they are eating that dead and decaying matter. And so it's turning that matter back into nutrients in the soil and really good humus for the soil. But in too high of a quantity in the garden, they can also cause damage to the crops that we are trying to grow. If there isn't enough in the soil for them to be breaking down, and they are being attracted to those copious amounts of mulch that we're laying down, and that mulch is too close maybe to our plants, or it's trapping a lot of moisture and we've had a really, really rainy season, then the pill bugs will, be there in mass. There's nothing for them to eat, so they start to eat your plant or the roots of your plant. I've, had radishes damaged here recently because of the high number of pill bugs. Had a friend message me saying, "Oh my gosh, these pill bugs are eating my lettuces. What do I do?" So don't ever let anybody tell you that pill bugs don't eat your plants. They absolutely do, but they generally will do it when there is a mass amount of them and they don't have anything else to chew on, or they don't have anything else to eat, right? So these are all things that we have to concern ourselves with when we talk about something being a pest. When we are trying to identify what is in our gardens in terms of good bug versus bad bug, right? There are a couple of different resources that I'm going to recommend to you and places for you to start. I always think it's a great idea to start with your local university extension service and or your state's Department of Conservation. This is going to give you very region specific information on insect ID. I talk a lot about squash bugs and vine borers and cucumber beetles because, again, those are the bane of my existence in one of the largest crops that I grow out here. People in other areas of North America have no idea what those things are because they just don't exist in that area, or they are so few and far between that it's not something that they have to concern themselves with. They don't need to identify those insects. But in their area, it may be melonworm or pickleworm, which I've never seen, and I would have no reason to worry about what a melonworm or a pickleworm looks like or how to keep them out of my garden because we don't have those here. So your university extension service, oftentimes they are going to have places on their website that is going to talk about the crops that are most commonly grown in your area, whether that is a commodity type crop or it is something that gardeners are growing. And every university extension is different. It varies from state to state, but this is, a general rule of thumb for your extension services. They're going to have that information somewhere on the site. And under the description of each of those things, oftentimes they will tell you what the insect pests are that predate on that particular crop for your particular area. So, if I go to a general website that says, okay, if you're growing squashes, you could potentially have these insect pests. And it gives me a whole laundry list of insects that might predate on squash. That's not getting me anywhere because now I think I have to figure out what 12 different insects look like when maybe only 3 of those actually exist in my state. So, starting with your university extension service, or again, going to your Department of Conservation, they oftentimes are also going to have lists of insect pests for your particular state or at least your region that is going to give you a place to start. So, as you are planting your garden, or you are even just planning your garden and what it is that you want to grow, you might want to familiarize yourself ahead of time of what you might want to be looking for. So, another resource that you can use, or other resources you can use online, are things like bugguide.net. This is an online community and a database that is hosted by Iowa State University. So, it offers a lot of information and identification assistance for North American insects. And for my non North American listeners, I apologize. I am not super familiar with all of the resources that you have, but I'm hoping that there is something that is the equivalent in your area to like our University Extension Service or our Departments of Conservation that will help you also with region specific information. And that maybe you have something like a bugguide.net that does for you what they do for us here in North America. It is specific to, identifying North American insects, and it's really good. It's got pictures, it's got all kinds of things. It's got a search function in there that will help you to break down, the identifying characteristics of what it is that you're searching for and help you to find it. You can also use Google and other search functions to help you identify these insect pests. Particularly if you are able to use Google's Lens function, it's very, very helpful to take a photo of the insect that might be in question and then use your Google Lens search in order to be able to find images that are very similar to what Google Lens sees in your photo. So your guide for this is going to make sure that you're getting as close up as possible, you're showing as much detail as possible, you're kind of cropping out anything extra that might be in that photo so that the search function can actually focus on just what it is that you want it to identify. And then see what you can find that is very similar. Then trace that image back to where it originated and make sure that it is a trusted source for identification. So, again, a university extension website, maybe it does lead back to bugguide.net or some other service that is helping to identify insects. The thing about using these online searches is that you need to be very specific about what information you are entering into these resources and how you enter it in order to be able to really narrow down the search. And we will get to that in here in a second, okay? And then finally, if you can get your hand on something like a Peterson's Field Guide for Insects, this is what I use. And the only reason I even have this is because I got it as part of my undergrad studies. So it has a lovely pictured key to the principal orders of insects in the front and the back cover. And it has a really cool sort of method for being able to identify or break down what you're looking at by asking very specific questions. Does it have wings? Does it not have wings? If it does have wings, is it got, two parts to the wings? Does it have four parts to the wings? Are they visible all the time? Are they not? Are they tucked under? And then it goes on to the next thing. and the next thing and the next thing. And by order of elimination, essentially, it goes all the way through the key until it finally gets you to at least the family that that insect falls into. And then you can go and look up the family, and it has all kinds of pictures in it of what the insects are that fall into that family that are most common. And so it gives a description of each one of those insects, and it shows a picture, breaking it down. It makes it a lot easier for you to figure out, okay, if you figured out that this insect is in the family Homoptera, then we break it down into the cicadas and the hoppers and the white flies and the aphids, and then it breaks it down into, okay, well, this is what a plant hopper looks like, and this is what a white fly looks like. So it is very, very handy for me and somebody who is very nerdy when it comes to this kind of stuff. But I understand that not everybody has a Peterson Field Guide for insects sitting on the bookshelf in their office for these particular things. It might be something that you want to pick up. It's really great also for like when you go on a hike and you see something that you've never seen before. If you can take a picture of it and come back, you can actually, use this guide and a very clear photo of the insect that you're trying to identify to go through and figure out what it was you were actually looking for. But also, the things that this field guide talks about in terms of its identification are really essential for helping us enter in those parameters into an online search as well. The identification of insects is not that much different from IDing a bird or a mammal or a plant, even. It's just a matter of knowing what to look for and then using a process of elimination essentially to figure out what we're looking at. The thing that complicates identifying insects is that there are so many different kinds. I think in North America alone, there are over 88,000 species of insects. And a lot of them are really, really small, which makes it hard to see all the different parts that we need to see in order to recognize those parts in order to ID them. So yeah, this is not something that is easy to do. And it's people spend their entire careers identifying insects and finding new ways to identify them. And then we also have to take into consideration that a large portion of these insects look completely different as larvae and as or juveniles as they do as adults. So, I mean, remember the ladybug larvae I mentioned? Yeah, looks nothing like a ladybug when it's in its infancy, right? So, I am going to try to give you some key information that you can use to help narrow down your search when you are trying to identify an insect in your garden. The more information you have when you go and do that search, the closer you'll get. You absolutely want to start with understanding what it is that you might be looking for. Again, making sure that you know what insect pests or beneficials are prevalent in your area by looking at your university extension or looking at your Department of Conservation or Natural Resources or whatever, and then understanding these basic insect identification techniques so you can enter your search and be more accurate. I am super excited that my rose bush from Heirloom Roses has its first bloom of the season. It opened up this week, and there is another one not far behind, and I cannot wait to see how many I get this year after I got 3 immediately after I planted it last fall. The one thing I'm paying attention to is the nutrition of the plant, and Heirloom Roses has me covered on that one with all kinds of options on their website. They have multiple options for feeding your roses, and one thing I'm obsessed with, and that's the mint compost. Mint compost is exceptional at providing moisture retention in sandy, dry soils, while also rich in natural humus to help break up hard clay soils if you're planting your rose in the ground. I, of course, opted for a container for my rose, and the mint compost can also be used as a mulch top dressing around my rose bush to help repel aphids and spider mites and the other damaging insects that we're talking about today that like to plague our roses. Head to heirloomroses.com, pick out your beautiful rose plants, add some soil amendments and some mint compost, and use code JUSTGROW at checkout to save 20%. Heirloomroses.com with code JUSTGROW. The link, as always, is in the show notes. Okay, so what are the basic sort of insect identification techniques that we can use in order to track down what it is that we're looking at? The first thing to do is identify its physical characteristics. Now, this is going to be a lot easier if you can take a picture and then you have time to sit and look at the darn thing and figure out what it is that you're looking at. If you try to do this on the fly, I mean, yes, pun intended, I guess, it makes it a little bit more difficult because you're trying to think back in your brain, okay, what am I supposed to be figuring out? What so, I get it. If you have your phone with you out in the garden, you can snap a picture, great. This makes it easier. If you happen to be out there with a notebook and you're maybe taking notes in your garden journal, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, then you might be able to write down some quick notes about this, but just know that this is going to take some practice in figuring out what it is that you're looking at. So, don't beat yourself up if this sounds like it's hard. The first thing that you want to do is note its body shape and size. So, is it elongated? Is it oval? Is it more round? How big is it? And if you can kind of compare this to something else that is stable in the garden. So, if you see it land on a flower and then it flies away and you're trying to approximate its size, well, then measure the size of the flower and then you can add that in there. This is an insect that is, you know, 0.25 inches long, or it's 4 centimeters, or whatever it might be. Okay. So the body shape and the size are some identifying characteristics. Coloration and markings. This is something else. So, what colors does it have? Does it have any distinctive patterns or spots on it? And when we talk about the colors, is it orange and black? And where is the orange and where is the black? Does it have an orange body with black wings? Does it have, orange and black wings with a black body? All of these things are very particular information that you could be entering into these search engines or into these online resources that is going to help you further identify what it is that you're looking at. Also, determine whether or not it has wings, whether or not those wings remain visible at all times, say like a dragonfly, or if it's something that it tucks underneath a hard shell, like certain beetles. Okay. If you can count the number of wings, is it a single set of wings? Are they dual sets of wings? Like again, on a dragonfly where it has two larger ones and then two smaller ones behind it. Also, what about its legs? How long are the legs? Are they tucked up underneath its body? Are they out, splayed out to the side? These are things that you can, put in as another identifier. Another one that's really good is whether or not it has antennae. If it does have antenna, how long are the antenna? And what is the shape? There are some very specific shapes to antenna that will indicate what family that insect is in. Does it look like a fan? Is it straight with like a little ball at the end of it, like we typically think of? Oh, an antenna. Are those actually antenna or are they eyeballs? That's the other thing. Make sure you understand what it is that you're looking at. So that is why it's really a good idea if you're trying to ID something that you take a picture of it. Okay. The next thing that we want to observe is its behavioral traits. Specifically, we are looking at feeding habits. So, what is it doing when it's eating? Is it chewing on the leaves? Is it sucking the sap? Or is it preying on another insect, right? This is going to let us know, number one, if it's a problem in the garden, if it's chewing the leaves or if it's sucking the sap, or if it's preying on another insect, that's likely a beneficial insect in our garden. The feeding habit of the insect is going to indicate to us what its mouth parts are like. And so we have, biting mouth parts, we have sucking mouth parts, and we have chewing mouth parts. And so these are things that we can use to identify the insect. The time that it is active in the garden is also important. Is it during the day or is it more at night? Now, obviously, a lot of us aren't out there in our gardens in the pitch black, but if you're out there very, very early morning, like dawn, or if you're out there late at night or late in the evening when it's dusk, Our pollinators and our beneficials a lot of the time are really most active between like 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. So if you're out there very early morning, just as the sun is coming up, and you're seeing this insect activity, it very well may be something that's left over from the overnight hours. Same thing as you're going late into the evening, the moon is coming out, the sun is going down. If you have a lot of very active insects out there, those also might be more nocturnal insects, and that is going to help you determine what it actually is and whether or not it's a good guy or a bad guy. Okay. And then also consider, its habitat, its location. Where was the insect found? Was it on specific plants? Was it in the soil? Was it out and flying around the flowers? Its behavior and where you're finding it is also going to be something that's going to help narrow down what it is that you're looking at. And keep in mind, a lot of insects can be recognized by their general appearance as belonging to a specific family, and that's going to give you some really good information. So you generally know what like a grasshopper looks like. You don't necessarily need to know what kind of grasshopper it is, because in most instances the grasshoppers are not going to do things that are really really good for your garden. So if you have too many of them, that might be a problem. But the closer you look and the more information that you have about the insect's body parts, its behaviors, its habits, the more likely you will be to track down the insect, the actual insect that you are looking at on one of your resources, and get more info as to whether or not it's always a pest, or if it's only sometimes a pest if it's there in mass. Again, like, the pill bugs or even grasshoppers, or if it's something that's always a beneficial, or it's always one of the bad guys, right? So I mean, look, we have some very common beneficial insects, ladybugs. And generally speaking, this is all ladybugs. And when I say all ladybugs, I mean anything that is in the coccinellidae, I think I say that properly, coccinellidae family. We do have certain ones here, specifically in Missouri, that are not like the ladybugs that we are used to in terms of, eating the aphids and that sort of thing. They're a Japanese ladybug, I believe, or Japanese lady beetle that tend to congregate in the fall around door jambs, etc. And they can actually bite you, but they also are beneficial. They tend to be tree dwellers rather than, dwelling down in our gardens. And so, yes, they again can be a nuisance if they are there in mass. So even though all ladybugs are predators of aphids and mites and other soft-bodied insects, where they reside and what type of ladybug they are is going to determine whether or not they are helpful in your garden, or if they are helpful in other ways, maybe up in the trees, but can be a pest if they are in mass gatherings, right? Green lacewings, anything in the Chrysopidae family, their larvae feeds on aphids and caterpillars and other pests. So those are good guys to see in your garden, generally speaking, anything in that family. Parasitic wasps, okay, these are going to lay eggs inside or on the pests like the caterpillars. Of course, that's going to lead to the pest's demise, obviously. Hoverflies, syrphidae, the adults pollinate flowers. So those are great in terms of being a pollinator. The larvae also eat aphids. So, and among other things too. I know there's a few other things that the hoverflies will also predate on. So these are good guys to keep in the garden, regardless of where you are. And then these big-eyed bugs. This is Geocorus, sorry, species. They feed on mites. They also eat insect eggs and small insects. So these are all good guys that we want in the garden. Of course, really common garden pests, aphids. I don't know of anywhere in Northern or North America that doesn't have aphids in some way. These are those really small, soft-bodied insects that suck on the plant sap. They lead to very distorted growth if you get them in mass. This is what a lot of our beneficials do actually predate on. In fact, these are such a problem for gardeners that I actually did a standalone aphid episode way back in episode or in season one. I think it might have been like episode 8 or something like that. So that should tell you exactly how many people complain about having aphids as a problem. Tomato hornworms, this is another big one for a lot of people. Those very large, fat caterpillars that can defoliate a tomato plant very rapidly. These are also tobacco hornworms. And I actually have to look it up. I cannot remember whether or not they are the same and they just go by two different names or if they're actually two different insects. I have to look that one up. I don't remember. Japanese beetles. This is one that a lot of people have problems in. Sometimes they are overwhelming in their numbers. And other times we have had it to where we've just seen a handful of them and then that's it. So I'm not familiar enough with their life cycle to be able to tell you whether or not they sort of go in waves. I do know that we used beneficial nematodes the year after we realized we had a really bad Japanese beetle problem because they overwinter as grubs in the soil. And they feed on a wide range of plants. They will skeletonize the leaves, and they seem to be have a particular affinity for fruit trees and rose bushes. And there's one other thing too. I think they eat a ton of, but anyway, they especially are a problem when they start to become, an overwhelming nuisance. Squash bugs, I had to mention squash bugs. They go after squash, right? And they also go back to, some of the related plants. They'll go after your cucumber plants if you allow them to. They'll even go hang out in your tomato plants if they don't have anything else to eat. So they're going to cause the wilting and, death of your plant. Rose sawflies. These are the larvae that feed on rose leaves. They create this sort of window painting effect. This is something else that is very common for folks. I have not seen them here yet, hoping my heirloom rose stays clean of these pests. I have not seen them. I haven't looked up to see whether or not that's something that we have to worry about here. I do know the Japanese beetles go after them, so I am just keeping an eye out this season. I am looking to replace some of the last few wooden raised beds I have in my kitchen garden with new beds from Planter Box Direct. I'm not one to waste money or materials just for aesthetics, so I've been doing this slowly over the past few years as the wooden beds that we built begin to break down. It's not just that they look awful, which they do, but they're literally falling apart at the seams and they're not holding the soil in properly anymore. I love Planter Box Direct's planters because they're UV coated, so they're not going to break down on me. And I can get them in any color combo I want and in so many different styles and sizes. Three of the beds I'm replacing are tiered beds, but they're in a very narrow strip along my driveway. The good news is I can choose from cascade planters, just like the ones I already have, only sturdier, or I can configure two long boxes just for that specific space with all of the options that Planter Box Direct has on their website. And they go together in mere minutes for me to be able to jump right in and get them filled so I can continue on with my gardening season. You can save 10% and score free shipping on your new raised planters by going to planterboxdirect.com and using code JustGrow10 at checkout. Planterboxdirect.com with code JustGrow10 for 10% off and free shipping on my favorite garden planters. The link is in the show notes. So, like we've talked about before, we really want to regularly inspect our plants for signs of insect activity. Good bugs, bad bugs, indifferent, right? We want to know what is going on in and around our plants so that if we do start to see damage, we know what insects have been most prevalent out there and we're going to know what to look for. Take clear photos of anything that you don't recognize as something in your garden, whether it's good or bad, and that way you can go and you can use all of these identifiers for a search. Now, how do you do this? Have been for a long time the Google queen. Like I can find just about anything on Google with a little bit of time, but I have to have the right information and you have to know what to put into the search. Be as specific as possible. You can enter something like flying insect that eats cucumbers, that has two wings that tuck under a hard shell that are yellow and black and fly during the day, right? whatever search engine you type that into is going to take all of that information and is going to pair it up with whatever, and you likely are going to come up with the answer of a cucumber beetle. But again, if you can take the photos, that is going to narrow it down. If you can use like Google Lens and take the photo and also add in that additional information, then you are going to get much clearer results, or at least you're going to have fewer results to shift through. Okay. All in all, we want to avoid taking any immediate reaction. So before removing or destroying an insect out of your garden, make sure that you know what its role is in your garden ecosystem. I know, you know, there's this sort of knee-jerk reaction sometimes, like you see some damage on your plant and then you see these insects there and you make the automatic assumption that that thing that is on your plant is responsible for the damage to that plant, and that may not necessarily be the case. The other thing too is to understand if it is a beneficial insect that is just not beneficial when it is in your garden en masse. Remember what I said about the pill bugs? I get messages, especially at this time of the year when the soil tends to be very damp around here all the time. And I get messages from people like, oh my gosh, I have these pill bugs. They are destroying my garden. How do I get rid of them? And my answer to that is always you relocate them. You don't destroy them. So I give tips and tricks for how to remove the pill bugs from the garden, which, by the way, my favorite trick is to cut a potato in half and put the cut side down into your garden beds in and around the plants that are being predated on. And the pill bugs are more attracted to the moisture and the decay under those potatoes, and they will gather underneath those potato slices and start to feed on them. So then all you got to do is walk out with a little container of some sort, pick up your potato, tap it into the bucket to drop all the pill bugs off and put the potato back down again. And just keep doing that over and over again. You will remove a large, number of the population out of your garden bed, and you can go and relocate it someplace else into a different, area of your yard or your garden or whatever. We don't want to get rid of these insects because they actually are helping in the garden. There's just too many of them at the moment, right? The other thing too is when you have an insect that is predating on your insects, or on your insects, on your plants. We want insects predating insects also, but if you have insects that are predating on your plants, make the determination as to whether or not that damage is actually significant enough to warrant killing off that insect. Because, like I've mentioned before with aphids, if you have aphids and you are doing what you can to encourage a really good ecosystem in your garden, you might find that after a few days of there being some aphid activity, you start to see ladybug activity, and they very quickly keep each other in check. So I'm never a proponent of removing an insect or harming an insect in the garden before understanding what its role is in that garden ecosystem, but also understanding whether or not you have any predators that can come in and feed on that insect. Okay. I don't know if it's, I don't want to say it's like, oh, all things deserve to live or whatever. I mean, that might be part of it, but I think it really is if we are trying to be balanced in our gardens and we are trying to, avoid a monoculture and we're using all these interplanting techniques and everything else, then it doesn't make any sense to also remove something else that is a part of that ecosystem. Yeah, well, unless it's a squash bug, and then by all means, go right ahead. And then, of course, one more thing that we want to do, I know this is all about identification, of the insects, but we really do want to plant a diversity of vegetables and flowers to attract and support those beneficial insect populations, and that is going to help us. If we understand the different roles that the various insects have in our garden, it helps us make informed decisions that are not just going to promote our plant health and maybe give us some peace of mind, but it's also going to promote that ecological balance. And I think the longer we do that in our own gardens, the better off we are going to be each successive season thereafter. So, if we can observe our gardens very, very closely, utilize our local resources for identification and online resources when we make sure that we trust the source, we can foster environments that support beneficial insects and ones that predate on those harmful insects and have a better and healthier garden overall. Until next time, my gardening friends, keep on cultivating that dream garden, and we'll talk again soon.